Started my first startup in '97. The world told me I was insane.
Our goal is creating future economies that are more regenerative and sustainable.
Something didn't match up. Why hasn't this become the next big thing? And that's where we invested.
The whole purpose of achieving anything in life is measurement.
Hey everyone, I'm Manu from the Shadow team. Thank you for coming to the session and participating in part of Shadow Summit today. We're on the tail end of day one, but I'm really excited about this upcoming presentation. We have Jim Andrews, CEO of SubHQ. It's going to be presenting on subcontractors and the great opportunities and obstacles of the next decade. So, and just general housekeeping, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, if anyone was on. Please make sure that as you have questions or anything you want to discuss or have Jim address, make sure to include them in your chat that you'll see on the right side or the Q&A section. And then at the end of the presentation, hopefully we'll have some time for some questions and answers. So without any further delay, Jim, I will hand it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and really appreciate the opportunity to present today. It's part of the Shadow Summit and this virtual experience. My name is Jim Andrews, as introduced, and I come to this presentation with experience in construction and real estate development over a really broad area, and been involved since 1979. And I'm sure I don't look that old, but yes, 1979. But I also grew up in a family of development back in the 50s and 60s. My dad and a group of partners were involved with developing lakes in the Midwest, things that would be almost impossible to do today, but grew quite a business in that. So I kind of grew up around this idea of development and construction. Ventured out many different times, but always kind of came back. So as a result, I have over 30 years of leadership experience in many different areas within construction development, both from the owner side and also from the subcontracting side now. I'm currently owner and chairman of American Ironworks and Erectors, which is based in Spokane, Washington. If you ever get out this way, look us up. This is a 34-year-old company that's been around since late 80s, and I purchased the company about 17 years ago. And we operate in 4 states throughout the Pacific Northwest doing large commercial projects. I'm also the founder and CEO, and that's kind of the basis from which I was introduced to SubHQ, which is a construction project management platform that's designed specifically for the commercial specialty contractors' needs. And it really was born out of AIE and as a result of just trying to address a lot of my own needs. I put on here that I have a degree in economics and management, only not because it's really worth that much, but it really kind of laid the foundation for a lot of what I'll talk about today in terms of my belief in data and my view of really looking at data. I really believe that numbers tell a story. And so as you begin to look at what those numbers are doing, I think it's really important to look at what that data is and truly unpack it and try to discover what that story is. And as we get into it, I'm going to use a report that was put out just over a year ago as kind of a baseline for a lot of what we'll talk about today. So we're going to get into that and talk about this McKinsey & Company report that came out in June of 2020. And it was a much anticipated study, and this was, in the works obviously before COVID, but it was an anticipated study about the world's construction industry. So there was, it was called The Next Normal in Construction: How Disruption is Reshaping the World's Largest Ecosystem. And it was based upon 100 conversations with experts and executives, firsthand knowledge of their experience. They're a huge national or worldwide consulting organization, reviews of other industries and their formative journeys and changes. If you look back on the automobile industry and manufacturing through the 70s and 80s and out, they really look back at that too. And then they confirm the results by going to 400 different global industry leaders and getting their take on what they discovered. So as a result of that, it's a great report. It's well worth the read and study. So you can go Google that report, The Next Normal in Construction, the June 2020 report. And it's not a big report, it's 90 pages, but it's filled with wonderful information if you're and information that's going to really start telling you a story. I'm not going to regurgitate a lot of that, but I'm going to use it as a baseline today. So it came out just a few months into the COVID-19 pandemic, and it had a few predictors as a result of COVID-19. And they were kind of what if scenarios. And the best one was, hey, we're going to get our arms around this in the first few months. And everybody, if you remember back, there was all that discussion about the V curve. You know, we're going to go down and then pop right back up. And then there was what if scenarios. What if it doesn't come? What if it takes longer to get the vaccine? What if people don't take the vaccine? What are all these what ifs? And now we know much better that what if within those what ifs, now 18 months into COVID, what will be's actually are. And they obviously weren't the V curve, not in all cases. We're still experiencing that. In summary, I just kind of want to touch on a couple of the things that came out of that report. The industry as a whole was already experiencing incredible disruption before COVID-19. I mean, for attendees here at Shadow Summit, I mean, that's why you're here. You most likely are geared into what is happening or part of what's happening. COVID-19 is likely just an increased accelerant to the disruption in numerous areas that were covered in this study and that we've already been experiencing. This ecosystem, which is quite amazing, is one of the largest, if not the largest in the world, is currently 13% of worldwide GDP. And what's being predicted is that by 2030, it's 15%, and by 2035, it's almost 20%. Now, those numbers may vary, but I think we can all agree that this is an increasing area, and just demographically, it's what's pushing that. 1 in 3 people in the world right now are in need of affordable housing, as an example. There's just this incredible need. We saw a large move towards urbanization prior to COVID-19. It's going to be interesting to see what takes place after. But there's still all these demographic pushes that are taking place that require a lot of building, plus the rebuilding of a lot of infrastructure. So in addition, so through this, they came up with 7 main areas that they discovered were areas of disruption. And then they came out with 9 resulting industry shifts that would come about as a result of these disruptions. So I'm going to just touch on the 7 areas of main disruption. And the first one is the rising customer satisfaction and total cost of ownership pressures that are coming out. And we all know, I mean, I know they're in Atlanta, for instance, there's some incredible projects that are getting off the ground. The sophistication of and discussion around a lot of these projects is something that you didn't see 10, 20, 30 years ago. And then now you got this issue of cost of ownership that's on there. We've been a builder of schools in the Pacific Northwest. And I remember when a lot of the LEED stuff came out, where they began to talk about air filtration systems and the environment that kids were learning in. And so you saw all this pressure and information, or all this materials going into the structures themselves, like the systems and the everything about what was being measured in terms of airflow, temperatures, and how it was doing all this stuff. What they never really looked at was, what is the cost of ownership of that? So probably 10, 15 years ago, you saw all these incredible schools come online, but nobody told the school boards what they were going to cost to operate. And in many cases in our area, we saw some of the operating costs of these buildings go up 3-4 times what they had been previously used to. And the problem with that was that they were now coming out of operating budgets instead of capital budgets. And that same operating budget was the budget that they paid teachers with, that they paid for curriculum. They were all the things that the kids needed along the way, but they weren't getting now, or were being taken out of the budget because they had to operate these buildings. As a result of a lot of those experiences, you have this new sophistication that has had to take place in terms of ownership pressures. You're seeing a persistent scarcity of skilled labor and changing logistics equations. We're going to unpack that a little bit more here in a little bit, but we're seeing this throughout the economy, but no more so. It kind of really started to a large degree within construction and really anywhere where there was skilled manual labor. We're seeing increased regulations and possible standardization of building codes. There's a real effort now to bring even, international codes to the forefront. We've seen industrialization, modularization, automation, and this attempt to offsite work to try to mitigate some of the things we just talked about above. Also seen a new direction in new materials, innovations in traditional building materials, digitization of products and processes from simple to really highly complex things. And then in addition, this has probably been the most noticeable one in the last few years. You've seen a lot of new entrants into this construction area where you didn't see it before. And that's in the form of new software. There's new investment, VC and private equity dollars, and new companies that kind of just sprung up out of nowhere that just came, took things by storm with the companies like Katerra that came in. And with COVID-19 still unfolding, I think we're going to be seeing in the future, and what McKinsey's really talking about is you're going to, expect to see a lot of corporate restructuring and increasing in merger and acquisition activities as well. Now, the shifts that they talk about are really, when they went through that and they looked at the 400, 75% of them, of the people of the 400 that were surveyed, say these shifts are inevitable. They're going to happen. And as many as 60% of them believed that they would happen in 5 years, which is kind of mind-boggling when you consider that. But that is indicative of the shifts that are coming. The first shift is really going to be more towards a product-based approach versus a project-based approach. I mean, construction for eons has been project-based approach. And it's just inherent into the system that we have custom projects that get built from the ground up different every single time. That's a project-based approach. What is a product-based approach? I mean, it's what you saw Katerra trying to do, but failed at. You're seeing this push and move towards this idea, but it's inevitable. There's this push. There's almost this need to have to try to get there. You're going to see specialization and really target niches. I mean, one thing about construction is that margins has always been really tight. So how do you increase margins? You get better at what you do. So you'll see companies that really start to specialize more in target areas where they know that they can control more of the process. Value chain and control and integration with industrial grade chain partners. That's the other shift that they see, but it's part of what I just talked about in specialization. And so when you get more control over the whole supply chain, you're going to have the opportunities to be able to control and see margins go up and mitigate risk. You're going to see as a result of that, the need for larger scale operations than what you see today. I mean, for me to do what I do in the steel business, and if I want to get into the detailing and fabrication and everything else within that supply chain, I have to scale that at a whole different level than the things I have to do now. So you're going to see consolidation. You're going to see companies join together as a result of that. You're going to see as a result of that customer-centric branding, distinctive attributes and values that kind of separate you from the other folks. You're going to see investment in technology and facilities. We just, I think in this whole industry shift thing, this whole Katerra thing has been very, very interesting. If you can see in the background here, I'm from Spokane, Washington, and Katerra had built their first from the ground up manufacturing plant right here in Spokane for their CLT products, and kind of took it by storm. And my company actually was able to build and erect the structural steel for that project. So I got to see not only what the end product was that we were putting together, but I got to see the processes that went into that. And that's we could do a whole series or discussion just around what I witnessed during that time. But you saw this huge, what I'm getting here, facilities is this unbelievable amount of money that went into systems and facilities just to create the product that was mind-blowing. I think it could have worked if they would have taken a whole different approach, and it still may work with other people at the helm and other people taking over facilities like that. But I can tell you lots of reasons why it didn't, and we'll get back to that even as it relates to the current subcontractor market. Investment in human resources. the ability to develop people and retain them, that's going to be a huge shift taking place. And then this one I think is fascinating, that internationalization. With this increased standardization, there's going to be this lower geographic barriers to that's going to allow for it in a way that we've never seen before. And then sustainability. I mean, a lot of discussions, in construction right now are around sustainable products. That was a lot of the conversation around CLT, and is around that. And so that's just beginning. That shift is just beginning to take place. One of the things with these disruptors in the current economic picture is really starting to deal with kind of where we are at today. And this kind of brings in some of my economics background, which has really been something that I've used throughout my life. But just as a baseline, in case you weren't aware of this, but for years and years, during every upturn and downturn, there's always been a direct relationship between residential and non-residential construction. And the first time we ever saw that break, the beauty of it was that if one was leading into a recession, the other would likely lead out, and you could always track what was going on really well. So if one of them started to go down, you knew the other would follow. And when one started to come out, the other would follow. And that, since World War II and all this tracking of data, it always became a very natural indicator. I think that's to a large degree why when you hear a lot of talk about construction data today, they're melding all of that together. But in 2008, that changed. There was I believe, a permanent break in that relationship, one to the other. Even though we still measure them together, you have to look at them as separate because they are not moving together. And we can see that more than right now than at any other time. In 2020, as an example, in another discussion around this, and I'll get back to the relationship here, we saw a significant drop in GDP at the time that COVID kicked in 2020. I don't think I realized how significant it was until I really started doing more reading, even getting prepared for this. But if you go back to all the recessions and downturns, and you look at what GDP was doing during those times, you see some really significant things. And the first one that you see is that during the Great Depression, which is obviously the measure of all measures, GDP in the US dropped 27.8% in the high 20s. During the Great Recession of 2008, in that time period, GDP dropped 5.8%. So even though it was very significant, it was still a long ways away, a fifth, 20% or roughly or less of what we saw during the Great Depression, even though it had this huge change. During COVID-19 in the spring of 2020 and during that time period, we saw a GDP drop in our country of 19%. That's huge. There's a huge ripple effect that I don't even think we completely see yet as a result of that drop. Now, on the other side of that, we also saw in commercial construction a banner year in 2020. A lot of that was due to the fact that we were building pre-COVID work. And now work's dwindling down and it's radically changing, we'll touch on here, but we also, not only did we see a 19% drop, we also saw the fastest recovery from such a drop ever experienced in the world. It's crazy. It's like there's nothing ever really to compare it to. And that's part of what makes this really hard. And going back to the relationship to residential and non-residential right now, it's really hard when you listen to the news, because when you're listening to the news, you're hearing all about, well, construction spending is up, a little bit, employment is up like that, but you got to dive back in and separate the two, because what's happening is currently in the current, these months that we're in right now, you're seeing residential construction on an uptick of somewhere between 15 to 20+%. But you've been seeing a decline from the very beginning in this commercial markets and the non-residential markets that's in existence, that's been there for in a decline since March of 2020. And so while one is going up, the other is going down. So it's almost in the statistics as if residential is carrying non-residential. And so you can't make decisions around that. I think it really kind of creates a really strange environment right now in commercial construction, because we're not able to really feel and see what's really happening. We feel something, but then we're reading something different. And so you really have to dive in. If you haven't really done that, and as you're going ahead and you're in commercial construction, you have to really look at these two things separate, because there is a break in that relationship. So as a result of that, not only has it been decreasing, but now we're seeing that decreasing non-residential is likely going to go into 2023 to 2024. My view is that, you hope for the best and plan for the worst. So from my vantage point as an owner of a construction company, I look at those numbers and say, that's the time period I have to plan for. This post-COVID work that we're doing, I mean, I've never seen such a sharp drop in margins in my line of work that I've seen in the last 12 months. And it was crazy how quickly and how that began to change. And we saw it not only in reduced amount of work that we were doing, we saw it change in the amount of win rates. Our win rates got cut in half, and our margins were dropping as much as 10% on gross profit margins. And you're seeing that across it. Now, everybody's at a different place in their backlog, so not everybody's has experienced that yet, but it's being experienced now. In addition, when we look at these numbers too, we got to look at the inflationary dynamic that's taking place right now with building materials. It's actually inflating some of the numbers, like construction spending. When you say, oh, construction spending is up, you have to also look at it from the context, well, how much of that increased spending is not necessarily for more, but for paying more for what you had, and paying maybe more may equal less. And then, the other part of the dynamic of these disruptors and all of this right now is the fact that commercial construction is still a stagnant ecosystem. There's really, in over 20 years, there's been less than 1% increase in productivity during that time period. And it's already been a low, considered low profitability, high risk, low profitability. Yes, people make a lot of money doing what they're doing, but they do large volumes to get that money too as well. But when you see the kind of shifts that we're seeing right now, as I just mentioned, you see if I'm making 5% on EBITDA and I'm seeing 10% changes in my gross profit margins, guess what happens to that EBITDA? It goes to a negative 5%. So we're seeing these kind of disruptors in the context of a current economic picture that's really, really quite unprecedented, and it accentuates both the obstacles and the opportunities that exist in the midst of this. So getting back to the McKinsey report, their statement, I love the statement, all players must prepare now for a fundamentally different next normal. Sounds like something you might hear over the loudspeakers at an airport or something. All players must now prepare now for a fundamentally different next normal. And I think, as I just say that and I repeat it again, all players must prepare now for a fundamentally different next normal. That's something that's got to really sink in deep for the subcontractor world because of the environment that we're currently living in. We're going to see radical shifts in that are hard to imagine from the trenches. And when I say that, we just talked earlier, like in the world I live in, I still live in a very project-centric world, not product-centric. And so as we continue just to show up every day, as we continue to bid work every day, as we continue just to do the stuff we've always done and try to do it as good or better than we've ever done it before, as we try to deal with all these different eros, these shifts are taking place, and it's really hard to imagine because we keep doing things every day in the manner in which we've always done them and feel like we need to keep doing it that way because that's what pays the bills. Yet from the trenches, there's that sense that I talked about earlier that's kind of seen and actually unseen, the kind of those feelings that, hey, nothing is the same. Everything is starting to change. And what is this going to look like and how do I adapt to it? I think that, and this is a question, but I believe this statement to be true. Will there be more changes in the next 10 years than we've seen in the last 50 years in commercial construction? I think absolutely we will. I think just by the nature of these shifts that we're talking about and what's already happening and the disruptors, that it's already in the works. Will the highly customized nature of building projects come to an end? It's hard to imagine being in the trenches and seeing that happen, but there's such a move and push to see that happen. I'm not so sure we're not going to end up there inevitably. And how can a highly fragmented industry with its inherent logistical challenges really change? For specialty subcontractors, my advice is stay focused on the things you can control so you are ready for that which you cannot. That's a kind of a war cry and mantra I have in my own company that I've had for years as I'm working with, and it really goes from the foreman in the field to even the journeyman in the field, through superintendents and project managers and right up to myself as well, that, there is so much in commercial construction already that's a variable. That's part of what attracted me to the industry. I loved the fact that every building that we built was going to be different and that there wouldn't be no two the same. That was part of the challenge. That was part of the appeal of getting into the trenches. Yet, within those variables, there's so much that I get to control. And the better I am at it, it's like preparing for a football game as a football team. It's like everybody's got to be able to do their job and they got to do it well, because we don't know if it's going to rain. We don't know if the guy next to me is going to fumble. We don't know those things that we don't know yet. But if we're ready and we're prepared, we'll be able to take those on even better. So more so that now today than ever before, I would believe for the subcontractor world, we're going to have to stay focused on those things in it. So given that, I'm going to focus now on just a couple things where I think, given this is the place where specialty subcontractors need to focus. So for today, I'm going to eliminate much of the noise and clutter. That there's been some great discussions and some great things have been presented today, and many of them are very futuristic, but I'm going to focus on two of the most immediate, attainable, and lowest risk that solutions for specialty subcontractors can make. And it's investment in technology, and it's investment in human resources. It's not the only two to look at. I think that you don't ignore the rest, but you got to stay focused and you look hard and understand the risk and rewards of the other things. I think as we get into these two topics right now, you'll see very quickly that the risk and reward issue is more of a need of necessity than it is of anything else. But the idea of customer-centric branding, the idea of consolidation, does M&A make sense? I've looked at it even recently, been approached by another company to purchase them, and it's really interesting. You really wrestle with a lot of things that says, does this make sense? Will this give us a competitive advantage, or could this be our demise? You have to look at that, but you can't not look at those kind of things. And I think it's wisest to do that, but we'll stay focused on the other things. And then that whole value chain control, that you really begin to look at that. How can you set yourself apart? You're already in the arena. If you're in this marketplace, and if you're a subcontractor, specialty contractor, you're already in the arena. It's time to engage in new and different ways that leverage your experience and expertise that's invaluable and irreplaceable. And that's the part I want to hit. You're in this because you've made money doing it. You're in it because you're really an expert in what you're doing, and leverage that. I encourage my people all the time. I've got project managers now that came from the field, and they've never really managed in that way. They've never even been in an office behind a computer in quite the same way. But what we really work to teach them to do is to leverage that experience they have in the field. This experience that who never actually worked in the field. When I talk about the trenches, they weren't real trenches. They were just the figurative trenches. They can take that experience that I'll never have and use it in ways that I would never be able to do. So I want to encourage anybody that's in that to use those things, that expertise, and leverage it in a way. I want to tell a quick story about when I first developed this software. I had no idea. It was a software that I built for myself because it was a solution. It wasn't a product at that time. But as a result of it, and coming up with a solution for our company, I created a product. And I thought I had way more invested than I ever imagined I would. So what do I do with this? I mean, I think it's valuable. I think it could be valuable in the same way it is to me for a lot of other subcontractors. How do I take it to market? And so I started getting out there, and I went to my first Built Worlds Summit in 2018, and Matt Gray and Matt Abels, who were the co-founders of that at the time. And and I sat in one of the sessions, and it was all about risk and mitigating risk. And up on the stage, you had the insurance guys, and you had owner reps, and you had developers, and you had GCs. And what their entire conversation was around was mitigating risk around the idea of how do we make sure that we get the right subcontractors on the job, basically, seeing that as the high risk. And as I sat there, I just, there was this whole top-down approach. And obviously what was missing from my perspective was me or somebody that could represent me in that discussion. But what I also realized was that part of what I developed as software was to also mitigate risk. I started to think in terms of what would it look like if we had lots of subcontractors doing things a unique way? Wouldn't the risk inherently be removed and just rise up, and the risk elimination rise up? Just in the same way that they were saying that risk of not knowing rises up to the owner and all that stuff, I'm thinking the exact opposite. If we really conquer this part, think of the risk that would be removed. But what it did to me is made me realize that I have to jump in the arena because nobody's going to invite me to that party. I need to start engaging into those conversations and being a part of the solution, not waiting for somebody to come up for me. So that's where I'm kind of coming to that. And this is, you're already in the arena, time to engage in a new and different ways that leverage your experience and expertise that's invaluable and irreplaceable. So getting to that first item, investment in technology. A lot of noise and conversation is around high-tech solutions. I mean, and they're great. BIMs, drones, exoskeletons, robotics, and I really believe those are the future. You know, the frustrating thing for me with BIM, and I'm sure there's been people that may hear this and stuff, and I'd welcome the engagement, but it's like, it is really hard at our level to get the modeling coming down to us in a way that can be used not only by us as a company, but then get to the field in such a way where that's where they actually have to have it, to be able to visualize what they're building in a way that they really have a difficulty. And it's an expensive process. I mean, there's lots of conversations taking place now around this idea of how do we do this? How do we make it simple? But that consumes a lot of conversation because there's a lot of work yet to do. And there are going to be some great solutions, and there are some great solutions that have come out of those conversations already. However, in this world that I'm talking about right now, the need is for simple tech that digitizes what you always have done or needed to have done and just didn't do because it was too onerous, or it was a separate bucket that often got forgotten. But it has to be done, or something that you need to have measured on an ongoing basis. And you know that if I could measure this, it would change my world. So those technology solutions, they're solutions that can produce instant and measurable ROI. I believe that about some of the simpler tech. The tech that I've developed is around that idea. It's instant and measurable. It gives you real-time insights across all projects all the time, something I could never get before and need now more than ever. It requires low barrier to use and entry. That's a huge reason, and still will be a huge reason why tech is really hard. Field adoption has always been one of the greatest obstacles to tech and the use of tech in the field. But coming up with tech solutions that create low barrier to use and entry, low training, easy adoption, things that streamline the fragmented workflows and eliminate redundancy. When I developed my software, I didn't develop software. I solved issues first. And in solving that, I kept realizing I'd solved this issue, but then I realized this one was attached to it, and then there was another one attached to it. And so I never got to finish the first one. I always had to keep kind of connecting these things, which in the advice of venture capitalists and others who take software to market, that's not how you're supposed to do it. But there's this incredible tension that exists in the investment world and the software development world for construction that's counterintuitive actually to, I think, to what has to be done. in order to really resolve these issues. If we just look at construction as being the ultimate solution, or the ultimate patient here, or whatever it is that's taking place, you have to be able to build this stuff in such a way where it can get adopted easily enough. So in this case, we kept building. I had VCs that said, why don't you just release this element of what you're currently doing? And I was like, I can't, because I will create fragmented workflows and I'll create redundancy. And that's what I tried. I tried lots of point solutions that were really difficult to integrate, because so they created more problems, even though the things that they specifically did were very cool and were very good. But there had to been this consolidation of workflows and reduction of redundancy. And as a result of that, then you can collect data that's worthy of the analytical insights that you got to have as a business owner and as a contractor in this world. To springboard off of those things, one reason that I really push for contractors to move into an investment in technology, especially at this simplified portion, is not only can you get all these things right off the bat, but I think one of the biggest things, and the biggest thing I've seen in my company, is that it gives your team wins now that open the door to the idea and the willingness to hire tech later. I mean, the interesting thing about construction, especially as it gets closer to the field, is the users of technology don't use technology because they want to, they use it because they need to. It's one of the areas where use of technology is never likely going to be a want, something they look forward to doing. It's something that they feel like they need to do. So as you can begin to build wins for your team, now you open the door for those other solutions that are going to require a little bit more time, investment, and know-how to be able to use. It also allows builders to do what they do best. And for me, it's like I look at it and say, and it's to help them do the things that they do, the things that I can't do without them. And like I said, the outcomes have to produce returns that far outweigh the costs, and they do. When you go to this and start to do this, there's not a tech out there that I'm looking at right now down the road that there's not the potential for that return to far outweigh the cost of it. And a lot of the simple tech, like the tech I have, the ROIs are significant right out of the gate. And it allows then managers, as never before, to stay connected to changing workforce and job sites. The next one and that last point is really important, because as we go to this next investment in human resources, I'll often say that we have an intuition gap right now in the construction industry. Not that long ago, within my company and throughout the industry, we could bid projects. They would all be in hard copy and plans all rolled up in big, thick deals, and the guys from the field would come in and load up. They'd hop in their truck and they'd drive off. And after you gave them the summary of everything that you'd done, you left it to them to go out and build. And when they got out there and they built, they were damn good at what they did. They did a great job at what they did, because there was something in their learning that allowed them just to intuitively make it happen, and they did. I think one of the great tragedies of the last recession is that a lot of those guys were getting older in age, and they left without passing on a lot of that. And to a generation, this isn't a bad a look at the generation, but their generation had to do things in a way because they never had the technology that would allow them to do it any other way. They were also the biggest resistors to technology. The new generation came along and they missed learning all that intuitiveness that came along, but other things in their brain got turned on because they had never a world without technology. So investment in human resources is a huge dynamic now because of this intuition gap that I believe exists in the industry. That's absolutely necessary, and I hope never becomes unnecessary. But you need these tools to be able to measure how that team's doing in a way you never had to measure people in the past. What would it look like if we could? We may have been able to improve bottom lines and do things that we still try to do today, but it wasn't as necessary. The ROI probably wasn't there in quite the same way. The investment in human resources now is more important today than it's ever been. and is absolute necessity as it's never been. 41% of the current U.S. construction workforce, even now, after we just talked about this outflow, is expected to retire by 2031, 10 years from now. 41% of the current U.S. construction workforce. The impacts and ripples effects of COVID-19 that I talked about earlier could actually accelerate this shift. So a lot of this data came out prior to that, just looking at it. But as I kind of looked at the data myself, in 10 years, the current demographics suggest an even older workforce than the one we're dealing with now. I believe that over half, maybe as much as 60%, could be over 45 years old. And that only 40% are under 45, and half of that are between the age of 35 and 40. Not the 18 to 35 group. That'll be less than half. And that's a huge, huge issue and problem that's coming our way that you can't put your head in the sand anymore and just ignore. The current age right now of many first-year apprenticeships, I work a lot with ironworkers, and I know this to be absolutely true in that, but current age of many first-year apprentices in the US right now is around 28 years old. Should be 10 years younger than this. Should be in that 18 to 20 range. We also know, unfortunately, that architects, engineering, construction is one of the least diverse workforces in the nation as compared to other industries. That's a proven fact. And project job sites, unfortunately, have a history of not being friendly to minorities. It's been kind of an isolated location where, while things had to change and within office places and a lot of norms and cultural norms changed, it never really made it out to the project job sites. And as a result, we have a number of people that are missing from this. And so the demographics of this, these demographics require immediate and proactive engagement by those of us that are in leadership in this arena in order to change. That's going to involve general contractors as well too, but it's really something that weighs heavily on my shoulders that says, what is my role? What is my part that I'm supposed to play in this? And I need to start engaging in this. And there's things I am doing to engage in that. And that's not easy. But we have to start doing it. There's really not another choice. So in addition to this, I look at this and you look at unions, and some of the solutions are that unions, trade associations, and companies need to have a clear and go-to strategy. People no longer are coming to our industry. For years and years, we would always backfill the people leaving the industry with the new people that just would show up to go to either apprenticeship school or want to know about the trades and all that stuff. That's gone right now. We have to go to them. We have to sell people on really the ROI of why the building trades are a great idea. It pays phenomenal. I mean, most of the people that were in before this could have only dreamed of what people are getting paid now to do this. And training has to be about ROI. There's been a lot of training in the past where they just do it, but most of the training has been on the job, to be honest with you. And whether that doesn't matter whether you were union or non-union or however it came. But the ROI around training has to be something that's really looked at, that everything you're doing to train that person has an actual return to them and to the company. But if you look at it right now, I mean, for a kid to go to college right now, they could easily spend, over $100,000 just to go to school for 4 years. And for an iron worker, for instance, going in, there's a $400,000 differential. Between losing $100,000 and the $300,000 you would make over the 4-year period, that same 4-year period being an apprenticeship school. So in your early 20s, to have that kind of differential, those are the kind of things that have to be sold to this young generation. We end up sending a lot of people to college that had no business going to college and came out with degrees that had no ability to really get a good paying job. I mean, it's really one of, I think, the tragedies of the last couple decades in the education system. When I went to school, the kids who went to auto shop or wood shop or metal shop or whatever, they were the same kids I was in biology with, or one of the history or English or some other class, and we played on the football team together. But there's been this bizarre, weird separation that's taken place over the last generations where those things are treated differently. And I think that's a bigger issue. But in the meantime, we got to get a go-to strategy out there, and we need to return to the 18 to 20 as being the new age of entry. So at the company levels, we need to invest our time to teach our own ways and to get the results we want, that's something we've never had to do. And I can honestly say we're not necessarily doing it yet. We talk about it a lot. We're doing things to change it and to change how we do things in the field. But I think it's going to go way above and beyond that. And training, we're finding it needs to go beyond just trade skills, but it needs to incorporate other life skills, because there's a lot of that lacking as well. But it all affects their ability to do well on the job sites. And then train in the use of technology and let the younger generation use it out of the gate, and help even some lead us. I know with work of total stations that in New York, putting up curtain wall systems, Leica did a whole ROI around it. And it was that ROI study that caused me to go buy $100,000 worth of Leica equipment. But it was this idea that they had the apprentices running the entire layout of these curtain wall systems on these huge buildings down in downtown New York. Why? Because they got it. They understood the technology. They saw the technology and they wanted it. And they jumped in and they became experts in it. So that's another demographic shift that's going to have to start to take place. To summarize all this is not rocket science, but it takes work, resources, dedication over time to see the fruit, to get the desired results we want. It's a dramatic shift for most of the industry, but it's one that can no longer be ignored by those that are in the trenches. And I'll be honest with you, as I've gotten into this tech world, it's radically changed my life, and in a way that exposed me to things I had no idea were really happening in the industry. And I think sometimes when we come to events like this, or we go to other tech events, or even on LinkedIn or wherever we're at, I think we do, unfortunately, a lot of talking to each other. And it's not bad conversation. That's all good conversation. But unfortunately, I think in a lot of cases, we're leaving out the people that are the ones that we're talking about or talking to. And I had no idea. There was so much happening that I would never even know about today, I don't believe, unless I had entered into this tech world and this tech environment as a contractor. And it's fascinating to me. It's absolutely enriching. And I think the other could be true. I mean, I think one reason that our tech will be successful in the marketplace is because we understand the end user of that in a way that's really hard for other people to know. But if we're going to resolve these issues, if we're going to hit these things head on, we just have to start engaging people where they're at. Just in the same way we have to have a go-to strategy for investing in our people, I think we have to have a go-to strategy as it relates to really getting people on board. I truly can say that probably my biggest competitor, even though there's lots of other competitors out there in the tech world, it's still Excel, which is really, it's encouraging from an investment standpoint and seeing the greenfield opportunities out there, but it's also really depressing to think that that's where so many people still live in a time when these kind of demographic shifts and these kind of disruptions are taking place. So I think it's time to engage. That's really the end of my talk. And I really want to thank you for your attention and time. I don't know if there's any questions here, but I would feel free to reach out to me if you do, or you want to further conversations, or even, look at some of these training opportunities, or look at tech, or whatever it is, or discuss it. I'd be more than happy to do that.
No, thank you, Jim. There was, looks like 2 questions that popped in. One was, are there any examples of organizations under trade associations that you think today are executing a strong go-to strategy?
Well, I think there's a lot of beginnings of it beginning to take place. And I think there's a couple of major challenges with that. Yes, I think there is. I know ABC's looking at that. I know AGC's doing things. I'm a part of Impact, which is the iron workers, and they're doing things, but we're still coming up short. So, if we're doing that in another area, we'd have to look at it. I think going to some of the show, the what do they call them? The little trade show type things that they do in schools and all that stuff has to go beyond that. I've gotten involved with at-risk youth in my community through a friend of mine that's involved with gang stuff, and he's brought me in to speak to kids that he works with. And so I think there's this relational aspect that we have to kind of almost go in and start really developing relationships, not just show up, but really invest in over time. And it's in those kind of like classroom situations where I see the dynamic change, where you're building a relationship and they understand you get them and understand the obstacles they have. And at the same time, when you start painting the financial picture and you see their eyes get big and the lights go on, it's like, whoa, really? That could happen? And for some of these kids, especially at risk youth kids, that just doesn't change the trajectory of their life and give them a vocational purpose. That may change the trajectory of a generational dynamic of their entire family. And so construction always has and can continue to have that kind of impact in the world. So, but I know ABC is doing this. I think we're just all starting to have these conversations because we all know it's not been enough. So are we good at it? No, not yet. Are we doing a lot of the right things and starting to? Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that those, and I would say that probably all the trade organizations like NECA and all that stuff, I'm not as familiar with those, but I'm sure they're all doing the same thing. But I think there's this concerted effort that somehow we gotta do much better. So.
Okay. And then the other question that popped up was, with 41% of the current U.S. construction workforce expected to retire in the next 10 years, right, by 2031, isn't that reason to invest in real future technologies and innovations now instead of, your example was, right, the low-hanging sort of fruits that you should start embracing together?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, and that's why I say, go for that. There's certain things like my world. I mean, if you look at it of iron, hanging iron, if you go and talk to a lot of these people about the robotics and the things they're doing, they'll say, this is going to be applicable everywhere, but, kind of thing. Because I always look at it and go, how could I use that? And you start looking at it. So there's going to have to be ways that we mitigate this. Even like with Katerra, we talked about Katerra, and Katerra had some great ideas and this automation and this whole idea of modularization. The logistics are still huge. You still got to build something and get it to where it's going to go, and it's always going to be an issue. That's why it's construction has never evolved the same way manufacturing has. So it's kind of one of those things. There's this melding of dynamics. But like a Katerra, for instance, I mean, they thought their answer was, we're going to go buy all these companies, but they partnered up with many of the wrong people, or they didn't tie into their expertise. They thought they knew better. I saw that a lot. While I was hanging iron on their thing, they had their site contractor, who they now owned and purchased, had overfilled the entire site, 6 inches. And while we're hanging iron, they're cutting the entire site down 6 inches. I've never, ever seen that on a construction site. But here is the leader in construction, the new future leader in construction, that's screwing up big time in the midst of trying to do it. You can't just come into an industry and change it overnight. You gotta work with the people who are there. I'd like to think that over this 41% there, that we actually have the opportunity to gain a lot of insight and information from them in the development and implementation of this technology, so that we don't lose that opportunity like we lost with the last generation. But absolutely, I think the sooner you start, that's why I'm encouraging people, start getting technology, go for the low-hanging fruit, get those stuff on there that brings instant ROI, and it'll set you up well for the stuff that's yet to come. Great. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions or anything else in the chat. So, Jim, thank you so much for the presentation. This was really great. The attendees, if anything does come up, or if you want to connect with Jim, obviously, please just let me know. Jim has this contact information up on the screen, so please feel free to reach out. And thank you again for everyone's time. Thanks, everybody, for attending.